Okay, I'm going to demonstrate some introductory concepts to the Pandas DataFrame, and it should get you up and running with common tasks in just a few minutes. I'm going to be covering getting and reading data, inspecting the data, filtering, slicing, some quick calculations, adding columns and rows, and some basic transformation, rolling calculations, creating new data frames, and exporting data. Okay, I'm using a Jupyter Notebook and Python 3, and the first thing we're going to need to do is set up our environment. That means we're going to import some libraries. You're always going to need NumPy when you work with Pandas. It does rely on it. We're going to import Pandas. We're going to do some basic graphs, so I'm importing the matplotlib, and this line of code here tells it to plot the graphs in the notebook. Alright, and then the only thing you may not have is the Pandas data reader, and if you don't have it, you can run this line of code providing you have Anaconda installed, or you can use pip install Pandas data reader if you don't have Anaconda. Alright, so we're going to use the data reader to get our initial data and to do most of the examples here. I'm going to get 5 years worth of data for both Google and Amazon stock prices, closings, openings, highs, lows, and volume. Okay, and you can see that when you get the data, there are a couple of methods you can put in a starting date using different date formats. All right, to run a cell in the notebook, right, you can click the Run Cell button up here, or in the cell you can hold Shift and press Enter. All right, and I'm going to do that for the data set. Okay, all right, so once you get data, probably a pretty good bet that you want to see what you got. So you can look at the first few rows using the head method. All right, and by default it gives you 5. If you want some other number, right, you can specify it. Okay, so similarly, you can get a view of the last few rows of data using the tail function. Right, so these undoubtedly will be some of the most common things you'll do once you start working with data. All right, if you're just sort of interested in seeing what are the columns and if there's any missing data, well, I can use the info function or method, and it gives me a quick overview. It tells me the column names, all right, how many columns there are, how many rows there are, and from this you can quickly see if there is any missing data. All right, since we're going to be doing something with 2 data frames, right, it's probably useful to compare and make sure that neither one of them is missing any data. All right, so I'm going to enclose both the info calls into a print statement so we can see them. Alright, so you can quickly see that it looks like there is no missing data. Okay. Alright, so we're going to move right on to then filtering data. Alright, and there's lots of different ways for doing it. If you just want to say see the opening price, right, I can just call open. Okay. And that will give me all of the opening prices. All right. If you want to be a little bit more selective, well, you may have to then use something slightly different. All right. So we can either use the iloc or index methods to get a little bit more specific in what we're looking for. All right. And so the first one I'll show you is the loc method, and it also uses the square brackets that you use for slicing lists. Alright, so if I just want to look at open, alright, I can no longer just specify the column. Since there's columns and rows and loc relies on both, I have to tell it how much of the rows I want to see. Alright, so that's basically telling it I want to see everything. Alright, and then if I want to specify a date in there, okay, I can sort of just get maybe the first day of November back in 2012. Okay, so there's the opening price back then. All right, so the iloc method is very similar. Alright, except for it only takes integer values. Alright, so if I want, say, the first row, alright, and then the last or the second column, right, then it's like that. Alright, so this looks very similar to slicing with lists. Alright, so that's actually the first row, second column. Alright, so if I want the exact same thing as I have above, right, it's first row, first column. Alright, 0, 0, like that. Okay, and then you can also sort of slice using the Amazon or the index. Alright, so this is probably the most common thing you'll do, is to slice when you meet some criteria. Alright, and so here we're going to look at the index, and we're going to look for it to be greater than, say, alright, the 1st of November 2017. Alright, and so there's that data. Alright, so getting a little bit more involved with filtering, I'm going to first show you some basic calculations. Alright, so I'm going to wrap all this stuff in a print statement. So I'm going to look for the mean, and I'm going to format it as a 3-decimal floating number, the standard deviation the same way. Okay, and then I'm going to get the volume mean, alright, and then the volume's standard deviation. Right, so when I run that cell, I get those values, alright, to 3 decimals as specified. Maybe it's a little bit too precise, but we'll just leave it like that for now. Okay, and then I'm going to actually maybe look for just very high volume days, and so I'm going to call a very high volume day the mean plus 2 standard deviations. Alright, and I've assigned that to a variable. Alright, and then I'm just going to sort of mask out the data that does not fit into that category. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and look at Amazon, and I'm going to look at when the volume. Alright, so I can either use the square brackets or I can use the dot notation like this. Alright, so some places you'll want to use the square brackets, other places it's probably easier to use the dot notation, and I'll just look for days that are greater than high now. Alright, so there they all are. Alright, quite a few. Alright, and if you want to find out just how many there are, well, I can wrap this whole thing in a len function. Alright, so we can find out that, okay, out of this data set, which was 1,272 long, 44 of them are high volume days. Alright, so a pretty small fraction. If we want to find out just how small that is, alright, I can just get and sort of create a proportion by dividing the length of the high volume by the total length, and we find out that, okay, about 3.5% of the days are considered high volume. Alright, so we're going to add a column, and this is a pretty interesting thing that you can do. So we've been calling, say, volume and things like that. What if we call a column that is not in the data frame? Well, if I just call it, and I'll make one a percent change. If I just call this, I'm going to get an error. Okay, but if I make up a name like this and then assign it to some calculation, all right, I will actually get a new column. All right, so what I'm going to do is take the Amazon percent change. I'm going to get the close here. All right, and I'm going to apply this built-in function called percent change. Okay, and then we'll just get a quick look at the data to see what happened to it, and we can see that, okay, yes, the percent change, which is the linear change from close to close, has been added as a column. All right, and the nice thing is that all these calculations, when we do them on a data frame, they're vectorized, so there's no need to write a loop to get through all the calculations that you want to complete. Okay, so now I'm going to come up with kind of a contrived example to append data. So I'm going to take some data from Google and append to it some data from Amazon. All right, so I'm just going to get, I'm going to call it Google 11, and I am going to get all the observations. Alright, and I'm going to use that loc function to do this, or the loc method, and I'm going to get all the observations in just 2017 November. Okay, alright, so I'm going to do the same thing with Amazon. Okay, and I will run that cell, and then I will go ahead and append Amazon to Google 11. All right, and we'll just look at the first few rows. All right, and so there you have it. And the interesting thing here is that, okay, when I appended Amazon on, it has this extra column. All right, the calculation wasn't done for Amazon. Sorry, for Google. And so you see that, oh, okay, all those values are basically missing. Okay, and if I do an info on this, all right, I can sort of see a little bit better what's going on. We can see that, okay, exactly half the values are missing because, well, they weren't done for half the data frame. Okay, all right, and then if you want to just see, all right, some of the Amazon values, all right, there they are. So the last few rows that show all the data. All right, so I'm going to, there's lots of different ways to merge data. I'm going to sort of show you just my preferred method. There's lots of methods that involve some SQL-like syntax, lots of functionality there. All right, I'm just going to sort of go for, or opt for, a simple method. All right, so I'm going to make a new data frame. All right, I'm going to call it close, and I'm going to have to call the data frame class to create this. All right, and then when I do this, I need to use the dictionary syntax to do it, and I'm going to call one of the columns in my data set Amazon. All right, and then I'm going to point at the Amazon data frame and get the close there. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing with Google. All right, and then we'll just see what that looks like. All right, so we get a new data frame, and yes, it takes care to match up the indexes when we do it using this way. All right, so if some of the if the dates didn't match up, we would see lots of NANs here for one of the data sets, wherever the missing data came from. Okay. All right, so let's see. I'll show you a little bit about grouping. All right, this example isn't great for grouping, but I will show you the group by first. So we'll take a look at Google. All right, there's lots of cool things you can do with the group by method. Unfortunately, with stock data, that's not so much. Okay, so I'm going to call the group by method. I have to give it a list. All right, and I'm just going to look at the open here. All right, and also if I want to see the data, well, I'll get when I do this as an object. So if I want to see the data, I have to give it some method. Now we're not going to get anything too meaningful here, but we'll be able to see if any of the opening days had the same open. All right, so just kind of glancing down through the data, I don't see that. All right, so again, not a great example. All right, but right, with the data set that I have, this is probably about the best I can do, is tell you that, well, there were no 2 days, at least from this slice. We're missing a lot of the data in the middle. There were no 2 days that had the same opening price. All right, if you wanted, we could do the same thing with Amazon, see if there's anything different there. All right, and no, it doesn't look so much like there is. Okay, but you can also see what it's done is sorted the grouping column here in ascending order. Okay, so that it's not in date order anymore, it's in ascending order. All right, so I'm going to show a slightly different way to group using resampling. All right, and so I'm going to get just some of the Google data. All right, and I'm going to look at volume. All right, and then here's a slightly different way to slice it. I'm going to look for the index. All right, and I'm just going to look for 2017 here. Oops. Okay. All right, now instead of using group by, I'm going to use this resample. All right, lots of cool things you can do with this as well. And I'm going to resample by the month. All right, and then I'm going to, again, I have to hang some aggregate function on here. I'm going to get the average monthly volume here. All right, so I'll run that cell. All right, and there we can see the average day. It looks like it's back in January a little bit, 1.65 million, something like that. All right, and we get similar values for all the months in November. All right, pretty hard to see what's going on in a table like this. All right, so what I'm going to do is show our first plot, our first graph. All right, and so I'm just going to hang plot on the end of this. All right, so this is calling the matplotlib. All right, and so there's a couple of ways I could do that too. All right, I could do it at the top level here, but I'm just hanging it on here since the resample has it as a method. All right, and so now we see sort of what's going on. We had this volume sort of bouncing around here at the beginning of 2017. It really spiked for some reason in May or June, and then has sort of dropped off since then, been sort of steadily dropping off. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and show you some other aggregates. All right, and to do it, I'm going to do a quick data transformation. All right, so I'm going to get an Amazon change. All right, and before we use the linear change, all right, to add a column. Now I'm going to do the log change, because if I perform a cumulative sum on this, I'll get the actual rate of return over the entire period. All right, so I'm going to call MP log, and then I'm going to MP log on the Amazon, whoops, close. All right, and I'm going to have to divide that by the close the following day. All right, so when I take the log of the close, and then if I hang this method on it, shift1, also part of Pandas, shift's very useful function for doing lots of different calculations. All right, I will get what I want. All right, I'm going to actually do the same thing for Google. Okay, so I'm going to run that, and then if I want, I can plot them so I can see what which one was the better performer. So I'll just start with Amazon. All right, and I'm going to hang the cumulative sum function off the end of that and then plot it like that. All right, so we can see that over these 5 years, right, we have we have 150% return on the investment. All right, and then to compare it to Google, all right, I can do that by calling the cumulative sum and then the plot there. All right, so we can see, okay, Google comes in as the orange line here, and yes, it's about doubled, not quite as nice of a performer as Amazon was over the period. Okay. All right, so I'm going to again create a new data frame to export to a CSV. So I'll just call it new. All right, and what I'll do is, right, again, we've seen this a little bit before. All right, when we were just combining different columns from the two different data frames. Now we have two actual series that we're going to combine into a new data frame. All right, again, I have to use this dictionary syntax here, so we'll have the first one be Amazon. All right, and then we'll get the Amazon change. All right, and then we'll add to that the Goog change. All right, and then we'll take a look at the head of that so we can see what it looks like. All right, so there's our new data frame, and we can see that, oh, well, the first row is kind of meaningless because, well, you can't do the calculation in the first row. All right, so I'm going to make a slight modification to this, and what I'm going to do is sort of slice off that first row. All right, so here's the syntax for doing that. All right, so it again looks a lot like a list slice when I do this. All right, and then when I run it, you can see that, okay, yes, we've dropped off the first row. We have a nice new data frame. Okay, all right, and so instead of showing the head, what I'm going to do is export it, and I'm going to export it as a comma-separated values file. All right, so what we need to do here is that there's a few parameters we can set, but I'm just going to go real simple here, and all we really need is the path. All right, and the path in this case is just going to be the name of the file I want to export to. So I'm just going to export it to my home directory. And then just to sort of complete the cycle, I'm going to import it. And so to import it, I need to call the pandas read CSV. All right, and again, it just needs a path. All right, and just so we make sure that we got something back, I'll go ahead and look at the head of that. All right, so there's the data that I exported and then re-imported, and we can see when I do this, all right, I lose the index. All right, there's no way to sort of note when you export to a comma-separated value that the date column is the index. All right, so when I import it, yes, I get a new data frame, but Pandas has helpfully given me a new index as well. And if you don't want that, all right, we're going to go ahead and go through a few steps to change the index back to the date index. All right, so I'm going to call this one new stocks, and I'm going to write pandas read CSV, and it's going to be the stocks CSV file. I'm going to read it back in. All right, and then what I'm going to do after I read it is I'm going to call the data frame and then set its index equal to the date column. Okay, and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, so there it is. We have a new index, but now we have this sort of redundant date column. All right, so then it makes sense that we might want to get rid of that column. All right, so we'll go ahead and do that, and I'll call new stocks. All right, I'll call the drop method. All right, the drop method also needs you to send it a list. So we'll drop the date. All right, we have to tell it where the date is. All right, so it's axis 1, which is the columns, axis 0 is the rows. All right, and then we have to tell it to do it in place so that I actually modify this existing data frame. All right, otherwise it would do it, but the next time I called new stocks, we'd still have date in there. All right, and then just to make sure that it happens, right, we call the head. All right, so there it is. So there's the transformed data. All right, so we've exported, imported, and then done some quick manipulations of that new data frame. Okay, and so the last thing I'll show you is how to rename columns. All right, and so I'm going to rename in our new data frame. Right, I hang the rename method off the end. I have to specify columns, and then I use the dictionary syntax, existing column name, new column name, and again I have to tell it to do it in place so that I actually change the existing data frame and don't end up with a sort of a temporary object. All right, and then once we do that, I will call the head. and we can see that, okay, yes, we've changed the name of the column. Alright, so I hope that's helped get a few basics for Pandas DataFrame.